Welcome back. In this session, let's look into the hands-on exercises for the triggers. So as the first exercise, what we do is we create a simple trigger. So the simple trigger is before employee insert. We see if the department is null, that is being inserted by the user. We are just setting the department as unassigned. Right? It's a very simple. If you look into the syntax, create trigger and trigger name. I have used the trigger name as before employee insert. So then we have to execute this trigger before insert. So that's why we are using before insert on employee table for each row. So then this is the begin and end of the trigger body. So if new.department is null, then set new.department equal to unassigned. So this is the first trigger that we are creating on this, and I would say like the trigger has been created. Now let's try to insert, right? So let's try to insert a record. So saying with the IT department trigger test, I'm just giving the IT department here, and I'm just trying to insert this. Before we insert, let's go and check what are the records we have. Okay, select star from employee, right? So I just want to see what kind of records that we have into the table, and you have multiple records where 33 records that you have, right? So now what I'm trying to insert is insert. I used when I insert, then I use the insert. The name that I used is the trigger test, right? Trigger test and IT department that have been there because I have paused the department here. So let's take the same example and don't pause the department, which is null, right? So I'm not pausing the department. When I'm not inserting the department, what exactly happens, right? So the record has been inserted, okay? And if you see, values will be trigger test and manager that has been inserted. And if you go and see the select, in the select, if you go and check, the department is inserted as unassigned. That is the value that we have, that is happened because of the trigger. So and the trigger that is being executing before inserting the row into the table of employee, right? So then let's take an example for after insert. After insert is actually, I'm just taking another query for after insert. So let's look into this. After insert, what I'm trying to do, delimiter, again I'm using $. Okay, so then create trigger after employee insert, after insert on employee for each row, So what I'm trying to do is, if I'm not inserting the employee, okay, then the value will be, I'm inserting the employee object, but I'm not inserting the employee for that particular record, right? If I'm not inserting the employee, then whatever the employee ID that is created when during the insert, so that employee ID it will take and it will insert the default details. Okay, let's take the employee ID whatever we have, right? 30, so 35, right? So 35 that you have is 35 that you have is a trigger test. Okay, now let's see, select star from, okay, employee underscore address where, okay, employee underscore ID is equals to 35. Let's check what happened for the previous insert. For the previous insert, there is no record that is being inserted. Okay, so for that reason, what we can do is we can insert onto the same employee table, okay, and try to see the record. So now I created a trigger 2. Trigger 2 is actually inserting the employee address whenever the employee table is inserted, right? I'm trying to see like, let's have this record, right? So whenever you see employee address table, there is a we have 31 employee ID. We have employee ID till 31. I would say test trigger and default address. Okay, let's take this is the use case. So this is the one which I am executing, and after executing this, let's check whether our record has been inserted or not into the employee tables. So I could see the employee address is the default, the employee ID is Tuesday is 36. Okay, but at the same time, let's go and check select star from employee. Okay, if you look into the employee, the record 36 must have inserted into the employee table. Okay, record 36 have been inserted, and the name of the employee is a trigger test default address. That is what we have chosen. Okay, and the same for the same 36 record. Okay, record 36 employee ID 36, you have seen the default address have been inserted. Okay, another catching point for you, let's see like what will happen if I have two triggers on the same table. All right, so if you take an example of the same triggers that you have, one first trigger that you created, it is executing on the department on the employee table before, and the second trigger that you created after inserting into employee table, and it's updating the employee address, right? So now so this is the one trigger. I would say like now you have multiple triggers on the employee table, and both the triggers are also executing on the insert operation, but one is executing before and after, another one is executing after. So what will happen in case of multiple triggers, right? I inserted a record into employee table. Okay, and if you see, the record has been inserted into the employee table successfully, and if you go and check the employee multiple triggers is that record number 37. So record number 37 is unassigned, so that is absolutely fine. The trigger first is worked as expected, and as employee ID is 37, I'll try to fetch the record of 37 here. So the default address, default city, default state, and default country, this is also executed. What happens on a single table, you can have multiple triggers. That's what this proved. And multiple triggers can be combination of anything: before inserting, after inserting, or before updating, or after updating, and before deleting and after deleting a record. So the multiple triggers on a single table also is possible, right? So in a similar fashion, let's look into the update trigger. So update trigger, you have okay, I'll take this query up because this is the one we have executed till now. Update query, so update query is similar. Okay, so but what we do, create trigger before employee update, before updating any record onto the employee table. What I do for each row, so I'm taking designation manager. If the designation is manager, then I'm just setting signal SQL state, so and managers cannot be updated. So I'm just saying that if the designation is manager, I'm trying to update the record of that particular manager, it will throw me the error saying that the managers cannot be updated. So this I am trying to execute before update, right? And the similar way, what you can do is you can also see after update. After update, if you are updating a record onto the table, and after updating the table record, if you want to have some updates wants to be made on some other table or some other queries that you want to execute when you are inserting or updating, when you are updating a record into the employee table. So for that reason, so what we do, create trigger name after employee update, that is the name I used. And so here I am using after update. After updating to employee, I can also update employee reporting, where I am setting the supervisor of the new record to the supervisor of old employee ID. So I am just making a body of trigger which actually changing the supervisors for the particular user. So this is also one of the query that you can create, and you can run the update queries. When you run the update queries, whatever the queries that we have assigned, whatever the operations that we have on this particular table, employee table, then that will be executed. Right? In similar fashion, you have something called the delete. So delete also, whenever you are recording a table, okay, on employee, so what it is doing, before you delete, I want to perform, I want to do some kind of checks. Based on those checks, I want to throw some kind of an error to the user, to the front end. So what it is, it's kind of, we are doing a validations of the user input based on the conditions that we have mentioned inside the database. Technically, sometimes validations may perform on the front end, application which is using the database, or sometimes database level also we can implement the validations to avoid having the improper data into the tables, right? So what I'm trying to do is, before you delete an employee, I'm just trying to check, select one from employee reporting, where employee ID and old employee ID, employee ID equals to an old employee ID, then I'm just throwing that cannot delete employee with the existing reporting relationships. So I mean to say, like, one manager has a reporting structure. For those managers, if you are trying to delete that manager, then it will not allow you to delete. So this delete operation also is successful for you. So it's a before delete, right? And the same way, you can also have the another way of creating the trigger, it's after delete. Whenever you after delete, so you can actually say, like, after employee delete, so on employee table, delete from employee address, where employee ID equal to old dot employee ID. So delete from employee address, okay, where employee ID equals to old dot employee ID. So I would say old dot employee ID is from the employee table, okay. Employee address is actually, what is the error that we are getting here? Statement is incomplete, expecting semicolon. So let me check what is coming with this, right? After delete an employee, for each row, okay, begin, and error, you have an error in the SQL syntax, check manual that corresponds to MySQL server version at line number 5. Statement is incomplete, expects okay. Looks like there is a small confusion on this part, but this query also, you can also perform the query which can execute it post deleting the record on the table, right? So this is the another way. So now basically what you have is, you want to see, we have created multiple triggers, right? So if you want to see all the triggers, you can use the show triggers. So if you see the show triggers technically has multiple triggers that were created, right? So if you try to analyze, you have the trigger name, before employee insert, after employee insert, before employee update, after employee update, before employee delete. After employee delete, it's not created for somehow, but I can check and get back to you on that part. And insert, so event, during the insert event, during the update event, during the delete event, all the triggers are happening on the employee table, and you will have the what are the statements that has to be performed, and the what are the timings that has to be executed before and after, and when it is created, okay. And this is the default conditions that we are using at this point of time, right? So all the triggers that you have that have been visible when you have the show triggers command, when you execute the show triggers, so you can see all triggers, okay. So for example, if you have a trigger where you want to drop, for example, so you have completed the scenario of having this before employee delete, right? So whenever you have a before employee delete, you want to delete before employee delete, right? So to drop a trigger from the database, you can simply use drop trigger. If exist, it will delete only if exist. So then before employee delete, so if you see, go and execute this, the query has been executed successfully. And if you go and check this triggers, the before employee delete trigger has been removed, right? That way you can see like how to delete the triggers, right? So if you see from the starting, right, so we have covered about how to create a trigger before and after, and we can create the triggers for the insert operation, update operation, and delete operation. And you can use the conditionals when you are creating the trigger. And if you want to see all the list of triggers in the particular database, you can use the show triggers command. And if you want to remove any of the trigger from the database, you can use the drop trigger command, right? This is all hands-on on the triggers, and we will meet on the next session in the next video. Thank you.